IBC vinyl community, Rob here with another video, and this video is a little bit different from anything I've done before. So I kind of come up with an idea for a video, and maybe other people would jump in on this, I'm not too sure, but it all sort of stems from watching a documentary on BBC a couple of weeks ago, where it was a history program, and they went into a cave which had carvings on the wall, and the carvings went back thousands of years, and when they looked closer and inspected the carvings, they saw the word the Beatles and the word the Stones next to one another. So even thousands of years ago, there was a debate: who's the best, the Beatles or the Stones? So I thought I'd do a video where I've picked 40 artists, and I've paired them up, tried to make it as fair as possible, and I'm going to choose my favourite out of each of those matchups. So like I say, after watching that documentary, it made me realise that this question's been being asked for, generations. So the Beatles, of course, and the Rolling Stones. So I know that people, they have a bit of an affliction about videos like this, and when you're sort of comparing music. So two of your favourite bands might be the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and it's all subjective and it's a bit of fun, but I just wanted to choose which artist I prefer. Now the Beatles and the Stones is as difficult as it gets, but I've made it pretty difficult because these matchups are pretty even. It's a tricky one, and I think with the Beatles and the Stones, and with a lot of these artists, it's probably just the mood you're in when you make the video. And even though I am a big fan of the Rolling Stones, I actually saw a concert on the TV from 2013 a couple of weeks ago, and the Stones were just fantastic, and they've had 50 years to do material past the Beatles, but I just favour the Beatles over the Rolling Stones. It's very, very close, but for me it's a win for the Beatles. Now the next, you can kind of guess who I'm going to pair these bands up with. So the Who, and I've paired the Who up with the Kinks. So two great British bands. Of course, with me having a bit of a history of being a mod, I'm a big fan of the Who, but I do think the Who are hot and cold. I think when the Who are good, they're fantastic, but when they're not fantastic, they can be pretty average, I think. The Kinks, a lot more material by the Kinks, and great songwriter Ray Davies, again another tricky one, but I've gone with the Who, mainly because of Quadrophenia. Not many albums have affected me the way that Quadrophenia has, so for me, just the Who over the Kinks. Now, a couple of American bands here now, and we've got Birds, and I put the Birds up against the Doors. So these are two bands, probably hard to believe. I'm in my mid-50s, so in the 1970s, I had no exposure really to the Doors or the Birds. They weren't on my radar until probably I was in my late teens, and even then I didn't really have much interest in American music. It's only probably over the last 20 years really that I've really sort of been aware of the Birds and the Stones, and the Doors, should I say. But I do have quite a lot of albums by the Doors, so I have to choose the Doors over the Byrds. Now, the next one is a female against a male. So I've chosen Peter Gabriel, and I've put Peter Gabriel up against Kate Bush. So Peter Gabriel against Kate Bush is, again, like I say, it's not easy. Kate Bush's music, I am a fan of Kate Bush, but out of the two, I do move more towards Peter Gabriel. You know, I've got a lot of Kate Bush's albums, but how often do I sort of reach for them and play them? Whereas Peter Gabriel, he seems to be an artist that I'm getting more into. So at the moment, I'm going to choose Peter Gabriel over Kate Bush. Now, a couple of American artists here now, and I've chosen Marvin Gaye, and I've put Marvin Gaye up against Stevie Wonder. So I've seen Stevie Wonder. I went to see him in 2014 in London, and he was as good as I thought he'd be. Marvin Gaye, of course, someone who lost his life far too early. But I don't have much Marvin Gaye music, but I do have a significant amount of Stevie Wonder music. So for this one, it's quite an easy one for me, Stevie Wonder. Now, two bands who sort of had a lot of success in the 80s, still both together now. So it's U2 against Echo and the Bunnymen. So when I was about 20, U2 were having sort of success, but I've always been a big fan of Echo and the Bunnymen, and I always kind of felt as though they were my band in a way, whereas U2 were hugely successful, but I felt as though they sort of, you know, I just didn't engage with their music the same as I did Echo and the Bunnymen. So for me, quite an easy one, Echo and the Bunnymen. Now, I don't have all the material by these matchups. So one of the matchups, I've got Wings, and I've put Wings up against the Electric Light Orchestra. Have I? Yeah, Wings against the Electric Light Orchestra. So the Electric Light Orchestra, huge success in the 1970s. To me, it's, you know, pretty funny that I put ELO up against Wings, Paul McCartney, because you know, I think Jeff Lynne's always wanted to be Paul McCartney or a member of the Beatles, and I suppose with the anthology, kind of his dream came true. It's quite an easy one for me. Never been a fan of ELO, but I think ELO and Wings is quite a level playing field, but I'm going to choose Wings. Now, let's have a Manchester connection. So, what about Joy Division against the Smiths? So I've got to show CDs because my son has all my Smiths vinyl. So Joy Division, one of my favourite groups, but they do suffer. I've said before, they've only done a couple of albums and a live album. So, and the Smiths catalogue of work is just phenomenal. So quite an easy one really for me, the Smiths. Now, here's two artists who I think are pretty even. It's Iggy Pop. So I'll put Iggy Pop up against Lou Reed. So two artists who a lot of people I've got a lot of love for. I don't really share the love. I do have albums by obviously both artists in my collection, but it's not a matchup it's difficult because I sort of feel the same way about both artists. You know, I'm a bit, you know, what's all the fuss about? But I suppose if I was going to choose one, I would choose Lou Reed. Now, my next one is, you know, who do you think I'm going to put up against Van Morrison? So this was pretty difficult to choose, but there was an artist who I thought fitted the bill in a way. Similar sort of volume of work, and that's Elton John. So Van Morrison against Elton John is quite a tricky one for me. I do really like Van Morrison, and I've not heard some of Van Morrison's albums, whereas Elton John, I'm more aware of his work, and even though I do like a lot of his sort of 70s records, after that, leave me a little bit cold, so I'm going to go for Van Morrison. Now, my next one is one that, this could make the news because you've got two huge artists here, and, who are you going to choose as your favourite? So I've got Bob Dylan. And I've got Bob Dylan up against Neil Young. So both of these artists I really like. But again, how much Neil Young and Bob Dylan was I listening to before I turned 40? Hardly any. I suffered from having a sister who was a big fan of Bob Dylan, so it kind of turned me off. And Neil Young was somebody who I'd heard some music by, but I was never sort of in a rush to listen to his music. As I've sort of, I don't know whether I've matured my music, my ears, I do enjoy Bob Dylan, and I do enjoy Neil Young a lot more than I used to do. But for me, it's not an easy win, but I'm choosing Neil Young. Now, the next one's pretty even matchup as well. I think people might struggle with this one. So I've chosen Blondie, and I've put Blondie up against the Pretenders. So in the late 70s, it was all about Debbie Harry for me. I mean, she turned 75 the other day. So it kind of worked out that when I was sort of idolising her, she was about 32. So perfect age, really. Chrissie Hynde, a little bit, late, more 79, 80 really, when the Pretenders sort of got their sort of commercial success in the UK going. And I found this one to be very, very difficult because I'm a big fan of Blondie's singles, and I'm a big fan of the Pretenders singles. But I've decided, because I just think they're more consistent, I've gone with the Pretenders. Now, the next one. You've got two huge artists here, and it's quite difficult to choose who to put them up against, but I've got David Bowie. Who do you think I've put David Bowie up against? Prince. So both, I think they both died in the same year. Was it 2016? David Bowie and Prince, both phenomenal artists. Very, very close to my heart, both of them. And this is one that's very difficult as well. But like I say, I've not made it easy. But I think I sort of connect more with David Bowie. But it's a very close thing. Never actually saw David Bowie live, but I saw Prince, and he was amazing. And I think he's still got about 200 years worth of music to release. So I'm sure there's going to be some good music from him released at some stage. Still waiting. But yeah, David Bowie just wins over Prince. Now, in the UK in the 90s, we had a similar thing to the Stones and the Beatles. We had Blur and Oasis. Now, as you notice, I haven't got albums by Blur and Oasis. I think I've not got vinyl by them. I think that's because in the 90s I just played Oasis and Blur to death. So I don't really have, when I buy music vinyl, I like to buy stuff that I want to get into. And, I know Oasis and Blur's albums so well. So, but this is a tricky one. One day it's Blur, the other day it's Oasis. But I've decided to come down on the side of Oasis. Maybe it's because I'm Mancunian, but you know, I do love Blur as well, but I'm just going to favour Oasis. Now, I've got one pair up. I've only got an album by one of the artists. So I've chosen Pink Floyd, and I've put Pink Floyd up against Led Zeppelin. So Led Zeppelin are a group that I've never bonded with, never known really what all the fuss is about. Pink Floyd were a band who I was a little bit lazy with. People say, oh, you're late to the party, I suppose. But over the last, you know, over the last 12 months, really, I've discovered that Pink Floyd are a lot better than I thought they were, and I'm a bit of a fan now. So Pink Floyd against Led Zeppelin is quite easy for me. Pink Floyd. Now, two American artists here. Difficult really to choose who to put them up against, but Bruce Springsteen, and I put him up against Tom Petty. So I mean, that's the only album I do have by Tom Petty, because I find that I'm not a fan of Tom Petty. You know, we're all different. We've all got our own ears, and you know, we hear different things in music. And Tom Petty's music just doesn't speak to me at all. Bruce Springsteen is an artist who, when I take the time, I discovered that I do really like him, and I like the guy's principles, I like what he stands up for. So, very easy win for me. Bruce Springsteen over Tom Petty. Now, not many to go now. So, the Jam. So, I didn't really know who to put up against the Jam, but I put XTC. Two of my favourite bands, you know, very difficult really. You know, I have to pick the Jam, but you know, it's a pretty close thing, probably 52% to 48. The more I listen to XTC, the more I get into them, which is funny because I listen to a lot of their music in the sort of early 80s, and the Jam's music, I just know it off by heart. You know, it's just so familiar to me. But XTC, I'm sure a lot of people might choose them over the Jam, but for me, the Jam over XTC. Now, I'm going to talk about, I've got a couple that I haven't really got records by. Now, I've decided to, Paul Simon is a really respected artist that I don't have any music by, but I've put him up against an artist that I haven't got any music by. So I've put Paul Simon up against Joni Mitchell. Now, Joni Mitchell, if on the VC there's a channel that I've kind of a bit of a fan of, Shannon D, and she's doing a series where she's going through Joni Mitchell's albums, and I'm kind of started to listen to Joni Mitchell a little bit, and for me it's quite easy to put Joni Mitchell above Paul Simon. Now, another one that I don't have music by. I do have Fleetwood Mac, but this is early Fleetwood Mac, and I put Fleetwood Mac up against Queen. So Queen are a band who I don't have anything by. You know, I've spoken about Queen before, how I find their music pretty soulless, and they just don't do anything for me whatsoever. I know there's a lot of Queen fans out there in the VC, but and Fleetwood Mac the same. You know, they're a band who sort of leave me cold. But Fleetwood Mac have got sort of a past that's a lot more interesting to me. So early Fleetwood Mac, but I suppose any Fleetwood Mac is better than Queen. So yeah, Fleetwood Mac over Queen. Now, the last one on my 20 is Elvis Costello. So I've put Elvis Costello up against the Police. So two artists who at the end of the 70s were I was a big fan of. Elvis Costello, I think his first 5 or 6 albums are fantastic, but I'm a big fan of all the Police's albums. So for me, I choose the Police over Elvis Costello. So that's 20. Not easy, bit of fun, thought I'd do something a little bit different. I know that music is an art form, and to put artists up against one another, it's not really fair, but I just thought it'd be a bit of fun to do. And if there's anybody else out there in the VC wants to join in on this and give me their favourites, then I'd love to see it. So if you're a new subscriber to my channel, then thanks for watching my videos. Thanks for anyone who leaves any comments. I always get back to you. I love the interaction in the vinyl community. So that's it from me. Thanks for watching this video, and bye for now.